our special guest today is Matthew Gleason. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. It's lovely having you here. So tell me a little bit about yourself, Matthew.
Well, I am a writer. I have been writing most of my life, somewhat as a hobby, but always knowing it's really what I would kind of like to do in the long term. Last year, I started publishing in magazines or on websites, selling short stories. And then I have also collected together three short story collections in my Strange Phenomena series.
Yeah.
And then more recently, I've actually released my first novella, When Vampires Attack. So I have 4 short books out right now. I'm working on a bunch of projects. I write sci-fi, horror, dark fantasy, weird stuff. Sometimes to simplify it, I say I write the genres with the big scary monsters.
So what inspired you to write in the horror genre?
That's a great question. I've always loved monsters. I have. Okay, there's a couple levels to this. When I was a kid, even before I really got into reading, which I know is kind of like can be unusual amongst writers, where there was a period where it was just hard for me to get into reading, hard to really grasp it. I would still collect books that were like fact books on monsters from mythology or Hollywood, and it was one of the things that first got me into reading. And then I actually owned not the scary stories to tell in the dark book, but the second one, More Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. And I read that so many times and aloud to people that it would just, all the pages fill out and end up having to be taped back together. And my grandmother collects horror movies. My mom is a huge horror movie fan and is really into that kind of genre stuff.
Yeah.
So that was all around me. Plus, I was kind of a weird kid. I was very unusual in a lot of ways, and kind of could be socially awkward. So I really identified with the monsters, the aliens, that kind of thing. So there was that identification level of things, and there was it just being fascinating to me and something that's been around me my whole life.
Yeah. So it kind of runs in the family then.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
So tell me about your books.
Okay, well, like I said, with the collections, they are all called Strange Phenomena. They are volume 1, 2, and 3. Those are all magazine length. The whole idea behind that is I could have done one big collection, but I wanted to be able to kind of use them to sell one another, and also wanted to be able to release a few things a year. So they are all about magazine length. I try to price them accordingly. Yeah. And the name of that, the collection, I was kind of trying to evoke a sort of Twilight Zone-esque feel, and I am a passionate fan of Dario Argento as well. So his film Phenomena is probably my favorite horror movie. I got a tattoo of it on my shoulder within 2 weeks of seeing it the first time.
Yeah.
And that I love that movie because it captures the wide range of things you can do with genre fiction, where you not to spoil anything for anyone who hasn't seen that, but you have a chimpanzee wielding a blade. You have a serial killer. You have telepathic powers, and all of this with heavy metal music. Essentially, I wanted to capture that I'm going to throw a lot at an audience, and that it might not have a lot of overlap all the time, but we are going to go on a weird, fun journey. And that's what I want with the collections. As far as When Vampires Attack goes, which is the primary thing I'm pushing right now, it's the longest book I've ever written. It's a novella. That comes from a few places, because when I was like 12 and I was first trying to write a book, I was writing a book about essentially a prison for vampires. So that was the root idea there, that it was going to be about like prison guards at a prison for vampires and like an escape and the resulting slaughter. That is not really a major thing in the book. There is a prison for vampires, but more recently, I believe last year, this is relatively dark. I was watching a BBC documentary on the families of pedophiles, which is not something, it's a very unpleasant watch. I could probably find it on my YouTube history at some point, but it was about people who were dealing with the aftermath of finding out that their fathers, who they were close with, were not who they seemed, or if they were on some level, that they were doing something extremely immoral and harmful.
Yeah.
So I kind of wanted to explore that theme. The idea of how do you react to just someone you love and who has actually been good to you doing something awful. So the story is about a young woman. Well, she's 29, so a few years older than I am right now. I'm 25, but a young woman who has is in a world where anyone can turn into a vampire at any time. It runs in the genes. People become blood-sucking monsters, and they kill everyone they can around them. It's about her dealing with the fact her father has gone through this. So she now has to reconcile very real parts of him that are vastly different, and put her in a position where he's not dead, but should he be dead to her, and how does she process this? And also dealing with the genetic component, because I am very interested in the whole nature versus nurture discussion, and how we react to these things that run in our blood. The working title originally was Blood Ties.
Yeah. So how did you work all that into the actual book itself?
That's a great question. I essentially wanted to use the bulk of my book to kind of slowly explore the reaction to that trauma. So without spoiling the direction the book ends up going in too much, essentially it's about that resentment and rage and denial, essentially the stages of grief being explored through this person who, as a result of this extremely traumatic event, is essentially seeing their life fall apart, and how they come to a new life and a new perspective on those things. And it's not all optimistic. I try to keep a comedic vibe to a lot of my stuff, but it certainly isn't all some kind of beautiful healing journey. It's about the messiness of life and the way that certain things do not get resolved. Certain things do not have closure. That's been my experience with awful things. A lot of times there is just no closure. There is acceptance as much as you can give it.
Yeah, that's right. Sometimes you can't close chapters, can you? You just have to deal with
yeah, so it's with this book, it's been trying to present the. I often think about how life is chaos, and stories are us selectively cropping out the messy bits. So for me, it's writing this book is trying to walk those lines between displaying the chaos and having some kind of formless narrative. So presenting ordered chaos.
Yeah. So what's the most challenging aspect of writing for you?
That's another great question. Honestly, probably staying out of my head too much. I can pick things apart. Like I said, I can really pick things apart too much. I can be my own worst critic. I think that's very common with writers.
Yeah.
I also will always feel like I have under-researched, even when I have really put in the time, even when it's not always necessary. I encourage everyone to be as well read as possible and as engaged with the genre. But like writing this book, I felt like I was underprepared because I hadn't yet read Carmilla, the vampire novella from the 1800s. So like I went back and I read that, which is a great book, and I recommend it to everyone. But like for me, I will literally stop dead in my tracks writing something because I've only read 25 versions of this hyper specific trope or something. So it's, for me, it's just getting out of my head, actually writing it, and not spending forever trying to make myself the expert on every little detail. Now, with this book, I actually had a little bit of help getting through that, which was that I wrote it last year over Labor Day weekend. 3 days was the first draft because I was writing for the 3-day novel contest. I've done NaNoWriMo a few years, but honestly, just setting aside 3 days, which not everyone can do, but 3 days, just Monster Energy drinks, not leaving the room except to use the bathroom, shower, and occasionally eat, let me actually just dive into the story and not get bogged down in like personal anxieties and literal OCD. That is something I deal with that kind of gets in the way. Just completely ignoring all that. That was a really fun writing experience. So besides some of the painful elements of sitting for 3 days.
That sounds quite grueling, to be fair.
Yeah, it was intense.
Okay, so how do you decide the pacing and the pacing of where you put your scares and your twists in your book?
Okay, as far as pacing goes, I tried to tie the project in with the way I knew I was going to be writing it. So, and also the way I tend to write. This is my first novella. I write a lot of flash fiction. A lot of my stuff is under 1,000 words. Even my standard length short stories rarely exceed 4,000 words. I am always thinking of a story. I'm a bad comedian. I've done stand up a few times. I'm not particularly good at it, but I think of stories in the same vein as a joke. So it is all about setting up a punchline or a twist or a resolution, and you do that through laying this trail of breadcrumbs where some key element that's going to pay off is not immediately apparent. That way you're not essentially having the audience get to the end before you, kills the tension. For me, I tried to structure this as a series of short stories, but not make it so apparent that is the case. Every chapter or two, up to at most two, is telling a very urgent story, whether it be life or death conflict or a particular emotional event. And it's all rushing along, resolving itself, but moving the story along. That's what I was trying to do here. I am not someone who likes to let things kind of sit, kind of slowly simmer. Yeah. So that was there where I was structuring it like interlinked short stories to a degree. Also where I knew I was going to be sleeping just enough, not doing anything else while I was originally drafting the first draft. That really led to a particularly fast-paced story, even for me. I was chugging these Monster Energy drinks, the mango flavored ones actually, and I was high energy. I was just wanting. It was like a bullet train in my body and in my brain, and that was what I tried to convey with the story. This electric energy as this person is going through this extremely traumatic and terrifying series of events, if that answers your question.
Yeah. So do you ever scare yourself with anything you write?
Yeah, I definitely can. Typically, it is with things that are already bothering me when I choose to explore them in writing. So a lot of times my writing will be, it's so stereotypical or trite, but a lot of it is from nightmares of mine. A lot of it is from things that are like actively terrifying to me, like that documentary on pedophilia. That is one of the darkest subject matters in the world, and they actually got into the element of, it looks like when you scan babies' brains during like pregnancy, you can see who is likely to turn out in that way. And that, like, the idea of having something that twisted as not entirely a choice, but then looking at the moral components of that is terrifying to me. It's so terrifying to me. I don't ever want to approach that subject directly in fiction, which is what I did vampires. But so many subjects. I mean, I was having the weirdest thought spirals about a short story from the early 1900s called The Library of Babel, which is about a library full of all the possible arrangements of letters and punctuation. And that was freaking me out because I was thinking about being on the outside of the universe, or the idea of writing a book and then accidentally finding an exact copy of your book and dust in the wind. Anyway, that was the weirdest little mind-breaking event. But I wrote a short story about someone who had been haunted by random events, random improbable events, just stalking them throughout their lives, torturing them with no rhyme or reason. And then at the end of that story, they die and fall on a keyboard. And as they roll around spasming, it writes exactly word for word the entire story. So it's a short story that in universe wasn't written by anyone. So that was something that was bothering me, even though it might not bother most people. And I explored that there. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that stresses me out, even if it's kind of unusual to stress someone. And that tends to be the bread and butter of what I write about.
That's really good. I mean, we all have different minds, don't we? So we all get scared by different things. I mean, my husband's scared of pickled onions. Go figure. But
well, yeah, when I was a kid, I was scared of gymnasiums. I'm still trying to find a way to frame that in a story, but I will get to it eventually.
Yeah, I mean, we're all scared of different things, so
absolutely.
Yeah. So which horror authors or works have influenced you the most?
Great question. As far as influence, because you want to look at stuff that's kind of been with you from an early age. Neil Gaiman is not primarily thought of as being a horror writer, but of course a lot of his stuff is horror very clearly, or overlaps with horror. So his horror, dark fantasy, sci-fi, he has been probably the biggest influence any writer has ever been on me. Then I've read more Stephen King than Dean Koontz, and I probably prefer Stephen King, as most people do. But Intensity by Dean Koontz is a book I read when I was about 12, which is way too early, and that has heavily influenced me, and especially not so much now, but it helped me grow as a writer, because for years I was trying to write in the style of Dean Koontz in Intensity for almost everything. Also, Chuck Palahniuk, famously the author of Fight Club. I know he's got a new book out right now, many novels, but I love Fight Club, of course, but his short stories have been really influential, particularly Guts, which is famously gross and unpleasant. And when I read it the first time, I was disgusted, and I wanted to be able to do something like that, make people feel that way. So yeah, those jump to mind. More recently, I have been reading a lot of Judith Sonnet, and a lot of Christopher Buehlman, but I've discovered both of those writers within the last 2 years. As far as Judith Sonnet goes, I really suggest Bloodsuck if you're down for something intense and very gross. I love vampire stuff, so Bloodsuck is great. And then as far as Christopher Buehlman goes, I found him through a vampire book, The Lesser Dead, which is amazing. But he's also, Between Two Fires has been one of the best books I've ever read, and is another thing that I just want to be able to do stuff like that. And everyone I've ever talked to who's read it has just been amazed by that. So those are some of the writers that really come to mind. Of course, there are dozens of others who I include, like Arthur Mack, and I'm studying his short story, The White People, right now, because I want to kind of bring in elements of that into an upcoming novel. But yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's fine. So how has the horror genre evolved over the years, in your opinion?
How has it evolved over the years?
Yeah. Where do you think
Well,
it's going to go?
let's see here. There are a few ways to look at that question, because I think a lot of times, especially with a horror film, people have that classification of horror, which, like, what is the term again? I am blanking. Elevated horror, yes. Elevated horror is something that I enjoy almost everything that is labeled as elevated horror, but I am infuriated by it as a label, because it seems to imply that horror is this dirty, disgusting kind of redheaded stepchild that is not inherently worthy of respect.
Yeah.
Horror has now horror has always had a very important place in culture. It is one of the most influential genres on almost every single level. I mean, even now, it is currently October 20th. We have Halloween coming up in the United States, and well, across the world, but I know in the United States it's more culturally, it's more in the, it's more iconic. It is more well established, is my understanding. I know it's been getting bigger in the UK in recent years, from what I've heard. But it is almost, I would say, about as big as like American Thanksgiving, almost as big as Christmas. It is a holiday that all of its iconography is horror. Horror is inseparable from culture, and it has always had incredibly complex and nuanced things to say, sometimes unintentionally. A lot of people will look at, say, the original Dracula novel by Bram Stoker, and there is clearly an element where he is scared of sexuality. There is an element where you can look at the concerns of the time of conservative fears against immigrants from Eastern Europe. Some have argued that there's an element of anti-Semitism there, and of course that's not stuff that we necessarily want to encourage. But you're always going to be looking at the zeitgeist, what people are experiencing, whether on a conscious or subconscious level. So to that degree, you're not ever going to see a lot of change in how that's relating to horror. You're going to see the change in where we are as a culture or as cultures, and what these ideas are. I am very optimistic about the future of horror. I think more so than a lot of people I'm around, a lot of horror people, a lot of creators, because I, in general, am very optimistic about the arts, and where things are going, because you see more people from more backgrounds making things. The only negatives that I am particularly concerned about are just essentially the results of late stage capitalism. So you have the whole AI concern, which is not a concern about AI replacing writers. It's a concern about AI flooding the market with nonsense that is just good enough for people to sometimes engage with, and scare off a bunch of people who would be more actively engaging, or who would make for a better culture around the arts. And then you also have these systems that kill new projects, create massive franchises where they don't need to exist. You've got The Exorcist Believer coming out a few weeks ago, which is absolute garbage. But you're always going to have, in a market this big, you're still having all these amazing creators making beautiful work, and I am so excited to see what's next. So yeah, just short answer your question, the horror is beautiful. It's not going away. It's always been important. It'll always be important. And despite any negative trends, we have a lot of amazing stuff ahead of us.
Yeah. You said Exorcist Believers a load of garbage. Is it really?
Have you seen it yet?
No, not yet. I was looking forward to go and see it, but I know there's been a lot of bad reviews about it.
I saw it with my mom for her birthday. I was not going to go because of the bad reviews, but my mom wanted to go. She enjoyed it more than I did. Neither of us loved it. It's to get into, I'll review it really quickly. It starts out relatively strong. The issue I have is that it is an Exorcist sequel, because the main plot of the story, the characters that are established, that we're introduced to, it does not benefit from tying in the way it does to The Exorcist as a movie. It feels very unnatural about midway through that they bring in the mother from The Exorcist. It feels like they kind of pause the story to do that. I mean, I actually enjoy Marvel films by and large, but it feels like it takes the worst lessons you could from the MCU or something like that, where they're just like having all these little winks, and they try to make the end more about being a sequel to The Exorcist. It feels very forced. I thought the cast was really good at pretty much across the board, but it just didn't have a lot to say. It felt like, also, I think one of the strengths of The Exorcist as a film is that it has a very clear idea of what the forces at play are. The Catholic Church is this kind of immovable object that has a very clear, as an element of tone and of history to the whole thing, and there is no clear face to the opposition to the demon in the sequel. There's all these people coming at it with all these new age spiritual ideas, which I find interesting in other things, but it just felt very out of place. Anyway, if you should go see it if you want to, there's definitely moments to like, especially if you're going with very low expectations, and I did go with very low expectations.
I mean, obviously with the reviews, you do tend to go with very low expectations anyway, but because it's The Exorcist, you kind of in the back of your mind, you sort of like expecting it to be really, really good, but obviously it's not going to be, is it?
Yeah, it was not my cup of tea. That is for sure.
Oh, never mind. So, have you got any memorable reactions from readers that stand out to you?
Let's see here. Memorable reactions from readers. I think one of my stories, which is I actually published on the Creepypasta Wiki when I was like 20, is about a person turning into a fleshlight, and someone said, you just made me throw up. Another person said, you have succeeded in creating something truly terrifying. That story, I believe, I later put in my first collection, and I was just really happy to be able to disgust people to that degree. And I don't write a lot of stuff with disgust in mind, but in that one, I was kind of trying to hit on the Chuck Palahniuk guts effects and get that sort of vibe. And outside of that, I've been getting a lot of positive feedback on When Vampires Attack in regards to the sort of free flow of the narrator's voice, the feeling that you're in the narrator's head. And I've been getting a lot of stuff where people have been complimenting the degree to which the characters are likable and which they relate to them, or that they also, I really enjoy. I've been thankful for how many people have been liking the comedy, because, as I said, I do stand up. I have done stand up comedy, and I'm bad at it. So I'm glad people are getting a few chuckles out of this. Those have been some of the standout sorts of comments. also get a lot of people who seem to say that when they come to my work, and it's so weird telling someone, by the way, what someone else has said that's positive about your stuff, but I would like people to buy books. Spoilers, that's something I would like. What people have told me is that my work is very unlike anything else they have seen, which can be difficult with marketing, but I like that I'm able to put people in this weird sort of nightmare scenario with my stuff and make them kind of jump into realities that they are uncomfortable with and surprised by. And that's been some of the feedback I've been getting.
Fantastic. So have you got any upcoming projects or releases that you're really excited about, Matthew?
Well, like I said, again, this novella just came out, so I'm really pushing that. It's been a week. Oh, wow. Time is weird. Anyway, as far as upcoming projects, I'm going back and forth between a few things. I was invited, and I'm not sure if I can announce this, so I'm not going to be super specific. I was invited by Kisto Healy, who I see you've just had a video put out where he was doing a reading for a charity anthology. I'm really excited for the story that's going to be in that. That'll be next year. I know when, but once again, I don't know if that's been announced. Beyond that, I'm going to do NaNoWriMo this year. I am wavering back and forth between two projects, but both of them are going to get written in the near future. One is called Zuzana and the Great Horned God, which is where I'm kind of going back and reading some Arthur Machen. It is about a alternate fantasy world that is based on Soviet Russia, where they torture orphans to turn them into witches to work for the state. It's about a girl who is blind in one eye, talking to the ghosts of the executed royals and using them to free Satan from under the ground and try to destroy the government. The other one is called Cannibal Sluts 4. It is a hypothetical sequel to a series that doesn't exist. So the whole premise is that the first three in this series have been intense, sort of nasty cannibal schlock, and we are already 4 books or 4 movies into this project, and we really have to go balls to the walls crazy. So we have mostly characters who wouldn't have been established previously. If they would have been, there's going to be footnotes that explain. We're going to explain the plot points that have led up to this, but we're in essentially almost a post-apocalyptic scenario where bioengineered nymphomaniacs have turned cannibal and are hunting people through the desert. So one of those projects is going to be immediately next. I'm also writing a spooky story for Halloween about ghost children trick-or-treating.
Oh, and how can you give any insight into that one?
Yeah, that one is very that is going to be very short. I'm actually going to post it that the Creepypasta Wiki is doing a contest. I don't usually write for free anymore because I'm trying to make a living, but I have a lot of friends on that website, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to post that and then put it in a collection eventually with a slightly longer word count. But the premise of that I will go ahead and give away. It is about a world in which everyone has died besides one person. Not super original on that level, but on Halloween, the ghost children come back to trick or treat. So it's about this person who is getting through life in the post-apocalypse by being able to hand out candy to dead children and to make them happy one night a year.
Oh, that sounds lovely.
But yeah, that's kind of all that's going on. I'm also, and I won't go into a lot of details about this, I am writing another short story for a super specific themed magazine that I will probably get rejected from. But yeah, I'm always working on like 35 things at a time because I can't get anything done if I'm trying to work on one thing. That's how I read too. I'm always reading 10 books at a time just to keep the energy going.
Yeah. But is that how you feel though when you send off a submission, that you're just going to get rejected every time?
I'm not pessimistic. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to do this. But my whole perspective, and I think what you need to have if you're trying to write short fiction and get things done, is you're collecting rejections. I try to set rejection goals rather than acceptance goals. That way, you're not going to be upset when you get
Yeah.
accepted. I try to submit all the time, many places, as far as short fiction goes. That way you keep on having good news, you keep on having those successes. But if you look at any of the magazines, and of course there's going to be differences that can't be measured, like how long someone's been writing or how many rewrites you're doing on your work, but like most of them, you're not going to see an acceptance ratio that's higher than 5%. So if anyone's listening to this and you're looking at becoming a writer, especially a writer of short fiction who is going to be submitting in the market, accept that you're not always going to be in that 1.5% to 5% that they are accepting. So what I do is I'm always sending stuff to other places. I'm always reworking it. It's always going to be a work in progress on every level with writing, and you just have to accept that or do something else.
Yeah. You've got to have thick skin, haven't you, when you're a writer?
Oh, absolutely. You are going to get email. You're going to get rejections. You're also going to get no response ever. You're going to get the vaguest commentary, and you're going to get stuff that absolutely would rip your heart out with how almost cruel the commentary is. You can't be about beating yourself up with that stuff. But I am really excited for this anthology with Kista. There's a lot of cool stuff coming out here soon. I'm hoping I get Cannibal Sluts 4 ready for Valentine's Day. I'm going to do a Valentine's Day release for that. But that is still a little bit up in the air, just depending on the pace at which that moves.
Yeah. Well, I hope that works for you. So have you got any advice that you would give to aspiring horror writers?
Okay. Yeah. Like I said, I kind of touched on it, was specific to short fiction, but I'd be happy to kind of expand on that. Like we said, you need to have tough skin. There's also, where I've never actually been asked this before in an interview setting, I will go ahead and repeat the advice that everyone gives because it's always true.
Yeah.
A good writer is a good reader. Now, for me, as I kind of alluded to, it took me a minute as a kid to get into reading. Then I got very into reading. I was by fifth grade on a college level. Because I can always, with my OCD, be like, oh, you're not reading enough. You're not doing this enough. You need to have a healthy relationship with both reading and writing. For me, you need to love both of them. If you're not doing any of this out of love, if you don't love reading, if you don't love stories, if so many people I'll never name names, but so many people I know who are into being creatives have no love of creation, there's this lack of interest in what other people are doing or what other people have done.
Yeah.
And if you find yourself feeling like you're forcing yourself to engage with horror as a genre, or if you feel like it's just not something that you are passionate about on every level, you need to find something else to do. It needs to be about love, and it needs to, you don't need to force things. So you should try to write consistently, but I personally advise against making yourself always reach a particular word goal. I try to write every day. Essentially, my advice is love it. Don't force things. Don't lock yourself into one particular mindset, and just explore. Treat it as play. There's so much that's been created before you. There is so much that you can discover. I've been getting to Arthur Machen, who I had never heard of before recently, and that's been completely expanding how I think of approaching so much of this. There is so much beauty in this world and in this genre, and the worst thing you can do is make it all about your ego or all about some kind of small goal in your life. Just love it, pursue it, do it, and that's all you can do. It needs to be like breathing.
Yeah. It does, doesn't it, really, though? It needs to be something that you really, truly love doing, because if you don't, what comes out on the paper is going to be no good.
Absolutely. Also, one more thing. This is a problem. I know I try not to be overly critical with genre fiction or with anything, but if I'm going to actually say a negative that I do see in fiction, and it's something that I notice with myself sometimes if I'm rushing, a lot of times I feel that people who are working in genre fiction can ignore the prose, like ignore actual craftsmanship on a sentence level, on a story structure level. So I do encourage people to study the greats and to actually take time on word choice. That's not a criticism of everyone by any means. There's so many great people working now and always, but I feel it can be very tempting to think I've got this great story idea. The idea is all that matters. Ideas are nothing if you're not polishing that. But yeah, that's everything I'd have to say to someone who wants to be a horror writer.
Well, thank you very much for all of your advice. And thank you, Matthew, for coming on to the show. It's been wonderful having you here. I wish you the best of luck.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I hope I wasn't too long-winded with any of this.
No.
It's great talking to you. Like I said, I hope people will check out my books, particularly When Vampires Attack. I'm running a sale on the Kindle ebook right now. It's only $2.99. It's also free in Kindle Unlimited. I really appreciate honest reviews, even if you hate it. That way the right audience finds it. But yeah, thank you for having me, and you just have a great